Go ahead, Nick.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. We are very pleased to open an afternoon of inspiration and encouragement to action. My name is Nick Mautern. I am a member of the National Board of Veterans for Peace, and I'm also co-coordinator with Kathy Kelly of Band Killer Drones. And Kathy and I and Brad Wolf are the primary organizers of the Merchants of Death War Crimes Tribunal. Mike Ferner has been doing a powerful job of calling on us to act in September to stop the genocide against the Palestinian people. And we hope that the ideas that we will discuss here today will help us to act to stop this killing and to join with the Palestinians in achieving true liberation and self-determination. This workshop is just that, a time for exchange of ideas among us all, because all of us are experimenters in how to treat an extremely virulent psychological condition in ourselves and our fellow citizens. That condition is described by Mary Fulbrook in her study, A Small Town Near Auschwitz. She encapsulates her description of this condition in describing the attitude of her grandmother, or her godmother. Quote, she seemed to have an impermeable barrier between herself and the screaming, fighting, and dying victims. It is almost as if the boundaries of her moral universe, the boundaries with which she felt any kind of empathy, were drawn so narrowly, unquote, as to prevent action. So we are experimenters in dealing with that barrier within ourselves and others. The stakes are the survival of our humanity and humanity, as we US citizens are being forced by our government to be accomplices in the genocide against the Palestinian people, each of us being dragged daily by our government to participate in and witness and have our faces and souls rubbed in actions that plumb the depths of human depravity. And we are told by a bipartisan congressional commission, and you can see in the link in the chat, that we must prepare as US citizens for prolonged war with Russia and China, dramatically increase military spending at the expense of so-called optional spending like food stamps, Social Security, Medicare for all, Medicaid, and other entitlements, quote unquote. And we are told that we should prepare ourselves, our families, our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren for national service, quote unquote. The good news is that tens of thousands of students in the US and around the world see instantly through the corporate colonial defense hoax in which we are all being colonized and abused. Today's presenters are people who have devoted huge chunks of their lives to working to stop the organized, totally illegal US killing and colonizing campaign. Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Excuse me, while Nick is doing that, I'd like to ask whoever keeps unspotlighting him, maybe it's an accident, but please stop doing it. Thank you.
Today's presenters are people who have devoted huge chunks of their lives to working to stop the organized, totally illegal US killing and colonizing campaign, which began with the beginning of this country. Our presenters include 3 students who have courageously stepped forward to stop the genocide in Gaza and to call out the depths of corporate involvement in violence in this culture. I will introduce our presenters as we go forward. Please take notes and post questions in the chat. Kathy Kelly will help me in keeping track of the questions and in combining questions and comments that seem to be similar. Each presenter will speak for 5 to 8 minutes, and we hope this will give ample time to develop our thoughts as we go into questions and answers and time for observation. Our first presenter today is Christian Sorensen. He is an intrepid researcher and educator on the bundling of U.S. military and big business. Christian is a veteran and a senior fellow at the Eisenhower Media Network, and he will speak today to us about the scope of U.S. military industry in the United States. Christian, we're very grateful for you to be with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Ava, Jack, Kathy, Terry, Malcolm, Geronimo, everyone. It's a real treat for me. So a little over half of the U.S. military budget goes to corporations, and 6 corporations dominate that half. Those corporations are Lockheed Martin, RTX, formerly known as Raytheon Technologies, Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics, Boeing, and L3Harris. I'm getting some feedback, so can everyone mute themselves, please? Thank you. I mapped those corporations. I mapped those big 6 last year. And how did I do this? Well, I looked at publicly available information that includes military contracting announcements that are available on defense.gov and usaspending.gov. I also looked at corporate press releases from those very corporations, and I looked at corporate job postings as well. Now, you combine those 3 main sources of information, and altogether they provide addresses of facilities where production takes place, and it basically also can tell you what the facilities produce. So I put all of this on a map. Also on my map, I suggested what a facility could start producing instead of technology of war or espionage. This addresses economic conversion. Economic conversion involves changing the output of existing industrial capacity. So how did I determine what a facility could produce or could start producing instead of tech for war or espionage? First of all, you can look at their inputs. Their inputs are available in, for example, job postings. They go into some detail there, and also in subcontractor listings, which are available on usaspending.gov. When economic conversion eventually takes place, the facility's workers, not the corporate executives, should be in charge, as the workers know their facilities the best, what machinery is capable of, what the inputs are, etc. You'll note when you see the map that many war industry facilities already produce goods and services that could be used for civilian peaceful purposes. This technology produced includes satellites, rocketry, telemetry, avionics, aircraft, information technology or IT, propulsion for the sea, for craft in the air, for craft in space, land vehicles, cameras and imaging technology, ships, logistics programs, communications equipment. All of this could be put toward peaceful civilian use. And it's already being produced by the war industry, except it's going toward war and or espionage. So economic conversion has many benefits. Numerous fields can benefit from the workers who are currently tied up in the war industry. Fields include public infrastructure, international scientific cooperation, disaster preparation and relief, energy generation and storage, transportation, etc. Another benefit is federal spending on non-military fields, such as infrastructure and sustainable energy, creates more jobs than military spending. Another benefit of economic conversion is less death and less destruction. goes without saying. Another benefit is the political space to bring home the troops and take care of them, instead of the current status quo, which is deploying them to hundreds and hundreds of bases around the world to bully governments and groups that try to chart an independent foreign policy or say no to corporate America. Another benefit of economic conversion is freeing up all the money that is currently going to a bloated military budget and nonstop war. That money can go to the public good, to helping people here in the United States and even around the world. So I write at thebusinessofwar.substack.com, and that is where my map is. And I'm happy to share the map now or later in the presentation. And I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christian. I really appreciate the work you've done, because it is something that is unique and gives us a way to understand what we're involved with and what we might do. Our next presenter is Jack Gilroy. And I could go on probably for almost the rest of the workshop talking about what Jack has been doing. But let me just say that he's a member of Veterans for Peace. He lives in the Binghamton area of New York. He has honorable discharges from the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Army Infantry. And he's a novelist and a playwright focusing on conscientious objection and militarism. You should know that Jack is a very, I would say, just relentless person and outreaching to the press in his area. Personally, he's very involved with visiting editors, and it's quite impressive. Jack is going to talk to us today about an experience and experiences that he's had in reaching out to the war industry in his area. So Jack, thank you very much for your work and for being with us today.
Thanks, Nick. It's always good working with you. And of course, we have worked at places like General Dynamics together. Christian, if you could bring up your map after I make my little presentation, that would be good. I think you'll see how it ties in pretty well to what we're doing. And
No
I
problem.
definitely
Just
want
remind
to
me.
thank the students for being with us. And one other thing before we start, Veterans for Peace is likely the most active peace organization in the country, right up there with Code Pink, all of the active groups. And you do see our flag, which is behind me right now. Can you all hear me okay? You can hear me. You do see our flag, and you'll see it very often at activities around the nation. But we're not funded by the War Department. We're not funded by Wall Street. And so if some people who have not really known about Veterans for Peace, and you have not donated to them, you can go into the chat, and there's a little button there to give a donation for Veterans for Peace. So consider that. What Nick is saying, I'd like to talk to you about some action plans, and hope that members of Veterans for Peace and the many chapters that may be watching right now, representatives, would be willing to take some of the actions that we took at Chapter 90 in upstate New York, in Binghamton, New York. And what I'd like to really hope that and plan that we will listen especially to Terry Lodge, Attorney Terry Lodge, the distinguished attorney from Toledo, well-known nationally, even internationally, but a fellow who has spent so much time on the issue of nuclear weapons. Terry has written and is going to be telling us later on about his most recent Broken Laws letter, which is an amazing document that will pinpoint the criminal element that is behind the war industry. The big lie is defense. That's one of the major lies of all. We no longer call it, of course, the War Department. Since 1947, it's been nothing but war, generated by threat and fear from the war industry. We know that Eisenhower said this in 1953 when he came in as president, and outgoing when he handed over the reins to John Kennedy and said, beware of the military industrial complex. He knew it was already there, and boy, do we know it now. War after war has just ruined any concept of defense. We are a nation of violence. There's no doubt about it. So we're so happy to have students here who might follow up on some of the things we're doing. Well, what have we done? Terry's first letter was directed toward the Department of State offices around the country. And over 17 offices were visited by individuals from Veterans for Peace chapters, letting them know, the workers know, that they were actually breaking the law. In fact, there are 5 laws that Terry, national laws that he put out, especially the law produced by Senator Patrick Leahy, formerly the senator from Vermont. And Patrick Leahy, known as the Leahy Law, states very clearly in this law, United States law, and it's a criminal law, not a civil, criminal law. United States law, it states that any entity, any state, any government that in the United States that sends weapons to a known human rights abuser is guilty of a serious criminal crime. And obviously, it's so apparent. The greatest human rights violator today is Israel. The tail of the dog, right? The tail that is wagging the American dog, and they get pretty much what they want. This could be ended if we stop the shipment of weapons, but the arms industry won't let that happen. And so that's where our fight is. We started, for example, on tax day, April 15th, in Scranton, Pennsylvania, the so-called hometown of Mr. Biden. And there at General Dynamics, where they make the 155 millimeter, which is the most wanted of all munitions, whether it's the Ukrainians who want it or the Israelis. The Israelis, of course, were able to take away a lot of the 155s that were going to the Ukraine because of the genocidal actions they were performing, tearing people's bodies apart with 155s. So we had the Veterans for Peace letter designed by Terry Lodge that we wanted to deliver to management at General Dynamics. It didn't happen. We weren't allowed. We put the letter in the door. We then proceeded up to another company that Christian was talking about just a little while ago, one of the big ones, the biggest of all, Lockheed Martin, the monster, right? 390 plants around the world. It's something like 139 in the United States. But this one in Archbald, Pennsylvania, a short distance from Scranton, they make Paveway 1 and Paveway 2 bombs, which have been tearing apart the people of Israel. Of Gaza. They have been used by the Israelis, of course, against the people of Gaza, knocking apart hospitals and homes, apartment buildings, killing people, thousands of people still under the rubble. So we delivered. We had to. We were moved. We were not allowed to go inside of the plant. We tried, but we did deliver it to a security guard, who said he would take it there. We also send these letters certified mail to be assured that the management gets them. Then we drove north to Endicott, New York. Christian didn't mention BAE Systems, but he knows well. They're one of the top 10. They're sometimes ranked as number 6, but BAE is the largest in all of Europe. It's the number 1. It's a Brit company, the number 1 manufacturer of weapons in all of Europe. So we went there and we decided we would push the envelope a little bit. We're carrying the letter, the Veterans for Peace letter. They told us they knew we were coming. We would have been normally okay, I guess, if we went in. They knew, and they had some guards that came, ununiformed guards, security. And I went around them, used the audio button on the door and said we wanted to talk to the plant manager. Now, I'm telling you this because this is one way, if you really want to take action in September, the days of action in support of Palestine, in solidarity with Palestine, being promoted by Veterans for Peace. If you want to take action, take the risk to get arrested. It's a trespass. It's not a major thing. You're not going to go to jail. I can't say that for sure, but most likely you will not. I refused to leave. The cops were called. I was arrested. I had a hearing. I elected for a trial because I wanted to put the BAE on trial. And that's what in every small community around the country, if you can find your manufacturer and put them on trial, you will do that. I defended myself. You can get somebody else to speak for you if you want, but I defended myself, and my questions were consistently overruled, were objected to by the district attorney, and then sustained by the judge. But we got our word out. Outside of the courthouse, we had TV people, we had signs and banners. The little courtroom was packed. I'm telling you this because you can do it in your hometown as well, because Christian's Map will show you they're all over. And in addition to Christian's Map, please do look at the Friends, the Society of Friends. Please look at their website where they identify the companies, the corporations, and the title of the article is Corporations Profiting from the Genocide in Gaza. And there is a list from A to Z, and Christian's Map combined with this will help you out. But an even easier way for some of you might be to go into Google and type in the name of your county, right? Your county and state, and put in defense contract. They won't know what you're saying because, you know, defense is not noted as war. Defense contracts in my county. You're going to be surprised what you'll see. So there's no shortage of finding places anywhere in the country because they are pervasive. They're all over the place. All right. So what about another point? By the way, again, media, if you can make your own media, everybody seems to have a telephone with a camera. Make your own media. Get it on social media. Call all of the media. Send them a press conference as to what you're doing. Let them know you're doing, and some will probably make it there. And ask for an interview. Ask to be interviewed even before the event as well as after. And also a photographer that can take photographs and get them out to the general media. Does this work? Yes. Ask Jerry Condon, for example, of Veterans for Peace. He picked up our press release and he put it out, and before long, an article was in Anti-War, the progressive magazines, the Covert Action, Counterpunch. So the word can get spread, and that is what we're trying to do, is to educate the public. Locally, BAE people who used to, the BAE company in Endicott, New York, they made a big thing of electric buses, and that's fine. That's the conversion that Christian was discussing, and they do get around. They have their buses all over. So you ask people what BAE makes, and they would say buses. Fact is that 4% of the total work of BAE goes toward the economic conversion. 96% is military, including the howitzer systems made in Endicott, New York, that fire the 155s made down in Scranton. Now, what about the next point? The next point is that we've got to support the students and hope that the students will support us. We are supporting them with the whole concept of divestment, boycott, divestment, sanctions. We're for them. And we're asking them if they would join with us to deliver that letter that Attorney Lodge will be talking about shortly. The other thing we'd like to do is to have students consider taking the pledge never to interview at a war company and never to work for a war industry. If Ellen could put that pledge up quickly, you can make up your own pledge, but if we could have that on the screen, Ellen, that would be very good. I declare my conscientious objection to profiting from making weapons to destroy people and other living things. On oath, I hereby declare that I announce entirely and reject the allegiance to any industry that produces, sells, gives weapons or weapon systems or hardware or software to any entity. I shall never interview for nor accept any offer for work for the defense war industry. We wrote that, and then there's a better and a shorter one, and everyone, you can make out your own particular pledge, but Nick Modern has made a very concise and clear short pledge. We'd love to have that pledge read by groups. For example, next Friday, we'll be having, you can take that down, Helen, or Ellen. Next Friday at Binghamton University, there'll be a rally regarding the genocide in Palestine. And at that rally, we're asking students, will they ask students to make the pledge? So if we could do that at universities around the country, that would be good. And not necessarily universities itself, high schools as well. that's about all that I have for now. And I hope I didn't take too much time, and waiting to hear what we hear from the students and others. Thanks again.
Thank you very much, Jack. I really appreciate your bringing your experience forward on this. I'd like to present now Terry Lodge. He's a longtime environmentalist, anti-war, and civil rights lawyer in Toledo, Ohio. And he's really done a tremendous job of showing, cataloging, listing, presenting ways in which the United States government is acting against its own laws daily in order to conduct this genocide. I really, I don't know how to thank him enough for this. This is something that is so needed to be understood by people in this country. And so far, we have not made enough progress toward that. But Terry, we're extremely grateful, and we really would value your insight on how to proceed right now. Thank you.
And thank you, Nick, very much for the introduction. I'm going to now try one of the most difficult acts of my life, is to upload something to Zoom. And we did it. All right. The central theme of the letter that I wrote for the Veterans for Peace, which my compatriot Jack has graciously called the Leahy Laws letter, was that the only thing that ruling class people understand, if they understand anything at all, is the possibility of criminal sanctions, of criminal punishment, of perp walk, of going to jail, of being prosecuted, of being publicly embarrassed and humiliated for violating federal law. And that is the driving force behind what I have been working on in association with the VFP intentions for September. You're about to participate in the world unveiling of a letter that I've assembled, but I want to explain a few things. Number one, it's embargoed and I won't be widely distributing it. Number two, the reason it's embargoed is because what this is a civil, a civilian indictment, if you will, of local manufacturing plants and outlets for the war machine. What we are hoping to do is have a number of local communities where there are Veterans for Peace members and associates to target a plant such as Jack described in the neighborhood that is connected to a larger war material supplier. The idea is to directly accuse and publicly confront corporations and their corporate officialdom for providing war material, knowing that there is a genocidal campaign going on in Gaza and the West Bank. The idea is to acquaint the officials of the plant with the fact, confront them, if you will, with the facts of the genocide, tie their product or service to the acts of the Israel Offense Force, otherwise known as the Israel Defense Force, and to make it clear that there are both international and U.S. federal law criminal punishments, and that we are going to be doing our damnedest as Veterans for Peace to prefer charges. I want to point out that and this is more than academic legalism, the very interesting aspect of genocide, it's the crime of crimes, that and associated war crimes, ethnic cleansing and other stuff associated with genocide, deliberate starvation, the purposeful invasion and free-form assassination, such as is going on in Gaza. That because it's the crime of crimes under federal, international, pardon me, US federal law and international law, there is no corporate shield. Corporations can be prosecuted for genocidal acts, but their ownership, their boards, and their employees can be individually punished. And the punishments include up to and including the capital offense. They are punishable, in other words, by death, by execution. And the idea in this letter is to explain, and I will go over it very quickly, but to explain that there's a genocide going on, that with some detailing, and an explanation of the official acknowledgments or findings that there is a probable or actual genocide that is underway, and then an explanation of the criminal liability that both corporations and the officers of those corporations might hold. The ultimate intention is to gather enough data for the Veterans for Peace to make a formal referral to the International Criminal Court of possible genocidal complicity being committed by corporations here in the United States, and also for VFP to demand and clamor for the empanelment of a grand jury by the U.S. Department of Justice to investigate and prosecute examples of the violation of federal criminal laws prohibiting genocide. So I'm going to give you a quick tour of the world unveiling of my letter. Essentially, as you can see, I describe that there are serious problems in Gaza, also marshal together some of the evidence of it, noting that the World Court, that would be the International Court of Justice in The Hague, has determined in January there's a plausible risk of genocide, that later the World Court in May actually has ordered Israel to immediately halt its military offensive in Rafah in southern Gaza, ordering the crossing from Egypt into Rafah to be kept open for the provision of humanitarian assistance, and has ordered Israel to take measures to ensure access for any fact-finding investigative bodies from the United Nations to investigate genocide. Israel has not complied with any of those things. Also, the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court has requested warrants for the arrest of Benjamin Netanyahu, which I see I've misspelled, and Yoav Gallant, who is the head of the Israel Offense Force, that the UN Special Rapporteur, that is an overseer of the situation of human rights in the Palestinian territories, in March issued a detailed report wherein she concluded that there is ongoing genocide. I have mentioned the Center for Constitutional Rights lawsuit, wherein the federal judge there, while dismissing the suit, notified the court system and made a formal determination that there is considerable evidence that the court heard and reviewed that there is probable genocide going on. Also in May of this year, the University Network for Human Rights, which is a consortium of 3 US law schools and the University of Pretoria in South Africa, concluded that there, and in an extremely lengthy and detailed and exhaustive factual and legal exposition, has concluded that Israel is perpetrating and continuing with an ongoing genocide. The letter turns to a specific, and here's the sort of fill in the blanks part, but it's a little more subtle than that. But we will then document and verify what we can from publicly available sources, a particular corporate outlet of, say, BAE Systems in Binghamton or something like that, a plant that's manufacturing artillery shells, that sort of thing. Detail what they're doing, detail our knowledge of the probability that their product is being used offensively by Israel in the course of its genocidal campaign. And again, I describe the Genocide Prevention Act, which is the federal law, and the War Crimes Act, also US federal law, as well as international conventions that make it an international crime to commit genocide. An important facet of this is to inform the ownership and management of these war crimes industries, these plants, that they are personally liable. It's a long-standing precept of the International Court and of international law. I want you to understand the International Court is the court branch of the United Nations. And effectively, nearly every country in the world is a signatory to the UN Charter, which is a treaty. And that means that they agree to be bound by the determinations of the International Court of Justice. The International Court of Justice, beginning in the immediate post-World War II era, made significant rulings as to corporate liability and individual, I should say, private person liability for providing weapons, instruments, or other means. A great example is that in the Zyklon B was the poisonous gas that was widespread used in the concentration camps overseen by the Third Reich. The British military court convicted defendants who, through their businesses, were supplying gas to Germany, knowing that it was to be used in extermination camps. And they proceeded to held, and this ruling has been cited repeatedly down through the decades. But basically, you provide the means for a genocidal extermination, you're personally on the hook. You do not get to hide behind orders. You do not get to hide behind the fact that I simply had a contract with the Department of Energy to make those nuclear bombs. You know what the ultimate end use of your product is. You have more than ample reason in this day and age, in this period of time in 2024, to know that your $69,000 each 155 millimeter artillery shells are going to kill Gazan civilians and destroy infrastructure. You're on the hook personally. This is an important lesson to learn, because the entire theory behind having corporate personhood and separate entities from human beings having recognized rights and privileges that are, if not equal to, are actually superior to human beings. This is a very important principle. It kind of makes me wonder, let's see, if they're deliberately participating in genocide by making 2,000-pound bombs, why aren't corporations, why aren't the officials of corporations also liable when they poison the Great Lake or destroy air quality and cause incidental deaths? In any event, specific intention to commit genocide is not required to find a corporation and its officers and employees liable personally as accomplices. We will be, as I say, trying to bring home these particular lessons. Again, as I indicated earlier, we'll be outlining a tiny bit of the massive array in the public record of genocidal acts and intentions by the nation of Israel and its governmental and military representatives. And finally, as I indicate, that we are conducting our investigation as Veterans for Peace because we believe that the targeted corporation that we're sending the individual letter to is committing war crimes and genocide. My intention is to help individual VFP chapters, groups of activists in local communities. I will personally oversee the completion and beefing up of these letters that will work from this template. And we will be coordinating media and other means of forcing some sort of community dialogue about the fact that there are criminals in our midst. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Terry. I think that everybody will understand when they read carefully through the letter just how powerful it is. And I know that we'll be using it here in Northampton, dealing with L3 Harris Corporation when you get that letter completed. I want to introduce next Kathy Kelly, and she's going to be talking about resistance in a somewhat different way. I think many of you know Kathy as a person who has, at great personal physical risk, gone to war zones in Iraq, Afghanistan, and elsewhere. She just returned from a mission to the New York City, to the United Nations, in an effort to engage various countries in demanding an end to the genocide and to actually cutting off their ties to Israel while this is going on. And Kathy's going to talk today about conscientious objection. Jack mentioned that earlier, but Kathy, we're very grateful for you to be here this morning to talk with us. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Nick, and I want to thank Christian and Jack and Terry and certainly the students whom I'm eager to hear from for helping us understand our personal liability for the genocide that is happening. Last Sunday, I was in front of the St. Patrick's Cathedral holding a sign that said, "We cannot say we did not know." I grew up in a generation that I think often wondered, how could the Nazis ever have been tolerated? Well, we can't express that kind of bewilderment any longer, can we? But in that week of visiting the various missions to the United Nations that agreed to meetings with us, it was really quite interesting to me that there wasn't a single mission that didn't acknowledge that, yes, the letter we handed them, which was not as comprehensive as Terry's letter, but it was pretty direct in saying, the July 19th, 2024 ruling of the World Court makes it clear that any signatories to the Geneva Conventions, the Genocide Conventions, is obligated now to cut trade ties with Israel, obligated to stop sending any more weapons to Israel. And there really wasn't a pushback on that. And it was so interesting to me also that really some of the most meaningful exchange happened at the elevator as we were being escorted out in the various missions that I visited. I visited with the ambassador of Ireland to the United Nations. And just as a note to the students, one of his questions for me was, "Are your students going to be having a rumble again?" And I said, "Oh, I hope so." Well, he took us to what I would like Ellen to show us as the first slide. And it's a miniature replication of a statue in the United Nations garden that was donated by the government of Ireland. And this is a statue made by John Behet, a bronze sculpture artist. And he's showing the bedraggled, wearied, massive Irish people disembarking from a boat after crossing stormy seas. And it's entitled Arrival: A New Dawn. And that's a bit of a hopeful idea, isn't it? A new dawn. Well, these people didn't go through the Middle Passage, nor did the ship capsize in the middle of the Mediterranean. So in some ways, yes, the many people that make up the population of the United States, who, apart from the indigenous people in this country, were all migrants, came with some new hopes. But I believe that this population can be appealed to, and we ought to help people identify with their own roots as people who often were escaping and fleeing conditions perhaps not as dramatically hideous as those afflicting Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank today. I also want to appeal to the history of the United States. And Ellen, thanks for going to the next slide, which following World War I saw an extraordinary outpouring of students striking, signing oaths. Now, this is not a very readable slide, but you can't get much better. But in 1935, the New York Times reported that thousands of students Some had estimated 160,000 students had gone on strike because they saw the horror of World War I. They saw the war profiteers who had manipulated people into it and made great profits, and they insisted never again. We will not engage. If we could go to the next slide, Ellen. Specifically, they were saying that in thousands of universities that they would not join protests against war and fascism, and 40,000 had signed, I'm sorry, 60,000 had signed an oath saying that they would never sign up or enlist to fight in a foreign war, and they would reject conscription. Now, the next slide that I want to show you is kind of tacky, I suppose. It's a several sticks of dynamite. But I want you to think with me, please, about Alfred Nobel. Alfred Nobel had helped discover nitroglycerin. He had helped create what was used in war after war. But at one point, there was a mistaken obituary. His brother died, and an obit was written for him instead because a journalist got it mixed up. And if we could go to the next slide, Alfred Nobel read the obituary that determined he was a merchant of death. And he was horrified, and he thought, no, that is not going to be my legacy. And that's when he created, apparently, at least this is with the story that's gone into the lore, the Nobel Peace Prize and the prizes for literature and economics, and the various ways of celebrating humanity at its best. And so could we hope that some of these current merchants of death might care about their legacies? I want to also point our attention in the next slide to the tremendous bravery of so many resistors. I'm thinking today of this particular one in Israel, Einat Gerlitz, and those who are refuseniks in a society that right now is almost 100% in favor of distancing and ghosting and not recognizing Gazans and Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank who are suffering desperately. There are young people who are standing up and voicing their refusal, and it's certainly up to us to hear that as much as we possibly can. So I'd just like to end with an imagination exercise. What if we were to imagine that the students this fall declare a student strike for peace? Imagine that the union leaders go on board with them and say to the university heads, do not punish these students. Imagine the faith-based leaders who are already developing mechanisms to make sure that they're all on board saying, yes, we do want to support the student movement. Imagine that they also endorse the idea of a national strike, a general strike. Imagine that people all around the world who come from histories that make them recognize their own personal liability were to begin to get behind these efforts, and imagine that we might possibly relieve some of the suffering of a child who is excruciatingly hungry in Gaza today, who is feeling bereft, orphaned, and who has been maimed. Can we embrace that child and redouble our efforts throughout the coming months to put an end to this terrible genocide and to all war? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kathy, for that perspective. I think that conscience is not given much house room as a power in our particular culture. The things unseen are the most powerful, but often the least considered by our corporate productivity-driven society. I really appreciate what you're saying. I want to introduce next Geronimo Pinto. I want to say too about the students and who just graduated students who are with us today. I think it's, I would say I'm very honored that they would be willing to participate in this, because people of my generation and somewhat younger, in many ways, have fallen far short of preserving the future for the people in their 20s and younger. And so I'm very grateful to see and to hear what they have in mind, and to see what they would suggest to us, all of us, as how we can be helpful and how we can be courageous. Geronimo will graduate from Cornell in the fall, in December. He's been a very forward organizer for not only divestment, but for understanding the depths that the academic system has gone into corporate America for sustenance, and the depths that they will go to protect corporations, military corporations. And I think we have to understand too that students are risking a huge amount in their future by getting on somebody's blacklist because of their courage in speaking out. So, Geronimo, I know that you're going to tell us about what's going on in Cornell and in other places around the country, and what that means for us. So I really thank you for being with us today.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Nick, and to everybody that spoke previously, and thank you for inviting us to this talk. It's really great to learn and hear from everybody that has taken a very principled stance at this time. And yeah, I'm just going to be talking about the kind of stories so far on the ground here in Ithaca, and potentially like what we might see coming next. And my good friend Malcolm will be talking about this a little more in depth too later. But as you said, Nick, the university has to be understood in a kind of certain place within the whole system of things, right? As a place where the next kind of generation of the ruling class is supposedly produced. It's also a site where people are recruited to these companies. It's a place where a lot of the intellectual work, a lot of the research and development is done for these companies. So in that sense, we see it as a kind of like a necessary site of struggle. It's also universities are quite interesting to organize in. They're a very small community, maybe not small, but very they're kind of their own little communities. We all know each other. We see each other every day. We go to the same dining halls, the same dormitories, etc. So it's kind of a place where it's bustling with potential. It's its own little mini society, and in that way, we can really try and turn the whole thing on its head. Cornell, when I got there in 2020, it was just after COVID. My first semester was almost all digital. And the combination of that and the combination of maybe what can be understood as the historical decline of the American left in the kind of like latter half of the 21st century and into the 21st led students to being in a completely kind of disorganized state. Students were at worst reactionaries. Many were the most of them are very apolitical, and the people that were kind of politically minded were very disorganized, right? We didn't really have strong organizations. There wasn't really a student movement, so to speak. And that really changed in the months following October 7th, even though, stuff had always been moving before then, but it wasn't really something that took all American campuses by storm. But the resistance to the Israeli genocide after October 7th definitely did. We were kind of launched into struggle. We had to organize very quickly. And this has kind of led us to a lot of interesting developments. The semester before then, fall of last year, it was again where it all started. We started organizing very quickly. We had a lot of, I guess, difficulties and growing pains, but all of this was done through struggle. We had experimenting with direct action, with rallies. Actually, one of our last biggest actions that we did at the end of fall semester of last year was we occupied. Actually, we occupied a couple buildings that throughout those days, but some of the main buildings on campus, main administrative buildings on campus, and we actually started off the occupation with an indictment of our president at the time, Martha Pollack, for her complicity in war crimes and genocide through the continued investment of Cornell in these weapons manufacturers. And we were lucky enough to have the resources of groups like Merchants of Death, War Crimes Tribunal, and using that legal language to kind of put that on display. That was an interesting thing we did at the end of last semester. And again, just continuing on, we would research and organize and always trying to get new students involved, trying to strengthen the organizations that we had. The spring semester of last year was the most intense semester we've had yet. We began with just constantly escalating our actions. We had some people get in trouble with administration, having disciplinary hearings for disruptive actions. We kind of developed new tactics by which we could disrupt buildings. We would enter libraries, and we would try and figure out how we could stay in there without there being enough cops around, and we would move around, and it was very interesting. And then 24 of us, 24 or 26, I don't know, somewhere in the 20s, were arrested in March, I believe, at a sit-in in the university administrative building. And then the encampment started, and after the encampment started, everything kind of blew up. The encampment swept the country, and we had to set one up ourselves. It was very hard, 4 days of just no sleep, constantly planning, figuring out who was going to do what, getting the tents, getting students ready to potentially get arrested, organizing all this massive influx of new students that we had. And I'll always remember the meeting that we had, I think maybe 2 or 3 nights before the encampment was set up, where we got everybody that we knew wanted to be involved into the same room and just gave everybody the plan of how we were going to set it up without getting caught, without getting all arrested. And I remember it was at the house of some of my really dear friends, and it's a big house. It's a cooperative house. It's a very big house, and they just packed the living room. And I remember it was there wasn't, people were standing, nobody could sit anywhere. It was completely packed. It must have been I don't know, like upwards of 50, maybe 70 people that were all ready to go in the middle of the night and set up an encampment and potentially be arrested. And that, compared to what the university was before the Palestine Solidarity Movement really took root in the American university, is just astounding to me. I remember when I was a freshman, it was, there wasn't this kind of this energy about students, but now things are moving. Now students are more organized. Students have learned more. Students are more ready to fight. And what our task now is, coming into the next semester, is taking the lessons that we've learned, not only about, tactics and protesting and dealing with the police and aiding people getting from when in the case that they might get arrested, but the lessons we learned about organization, about how do we organize a big group of students, how do we get more people involved, how do we make sure that we can make decisions quickly, but still asking questions about mass democracy in our organizations. These are all things that now are at the forefront, and we see as totally necessary for the development of the student movement, beyond something that is just going to be kind of based off of imitation. We are constantly worried about, the student movement dying out. We see so much potential in the student movement, and we want the student movement to be strengthened through organization and through mass organization that could be ready to consistently escalate on a mass scale and confront the university and confront the state and confront these genocidal weapons manufacturers on a mass level. We see that mass action is the only way forward with this. And what mass action, I think, means for us too is breaking away from the confines of the university, breaking away from this person's a student, this person's not a student. It's all the same struggle, right? We want to break down the barriers of student and non-student and build stronger ties with our local communities, stronger ties with the struggles that are, ongoing in Ithaca and throughout the U.S. Struggles against, police brutality, struggles for Indigenous solidarity and Indigenous sovereignty. And most topical to us now in Ithaca right now is the labor struggle, which, Kathy touched on a little bit. Cornell is unionized with UAW, United Auto Workers, and they have been in contract negotiations over the past 2 months. Contract negotiations stalled, and now Cornell, UAW, Local 2300, just authorized a strike. The strike vote passed 94% yes, with 95% of the 1,200 unionized workers voting, which is record numbers for Cornell UAW, which hasn't struck since the 80s. UAW is a ceasefire union. It's one of the first unions that called for a ceasefire. A lot of our, a lot of our regional leadership and some of our local leadership, some, brave workers that are standing up to the university were some of the same people that were arrested with us in March. So seeking to constantly bridge that gap that's imposed on us artificially is something that we need. We need mass action. We need people to stop being kind of siloed into these categories that, you go to school, you go to work, and you go home and you have no political existence. Rather, we want something that, is going to be able to raise a consciousness and to materially change the state of things through mass action. And these are all dense questions that we don't really know the answers to, but we're constantly learning, and we're learning through struggle, and we're learning through practice. And we're, very lucky to have these connections with groups like Veterans for Peace that are going to be able to, again, build stronger connections that are going to be broaden the scope of the student movement into one that can really be capable of mass action. We know of the upstate New York, central New York specifically, as Jack knows, and everybody here knows now, is riddled with these defense contractors, Endicott, Hector, they're all over the place. Syracuse. So seeing, again, those struggles can be tied is also something that we'd always like to experiment with and think about and discuss. Yeah, I think Nick wanted me also to talk to kind of let you all know what we could what we could benefit from in talking to VFP, and we could always use, if anybody knows some good lawyers, we could always use more lawyers because a lot of us get in trouble. Yeah, I know Malcolm has some other stuff that he'll ask of you, but for now, some lawyers would be good. And I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Geronimo, thank you very much. I think the way you draw connections between other struggles by other groups and the idea of mass action is absolutely critical. And it's very, very important to keep that in mind as a real possibility rather than a dream that comes and goes through our minds. I'd like to now introduce Malcolm Olson. He just graduated from Cornell, and he has also been very much involved in going after the specifics of how Cornell has been involved with the war industry. Malcolm, please carry forward. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much, Nick, for the introduction and also for pulling us into this great talk. I'd also like to thank Christian, Gilroy, Terry, Kathy, and Ava for speaking today. It's a real honor for Geronimo and I to be talking alongside such accomplished and dedicated activists and anti-imperialists. So Geronimo did a great job of summarizing some of the on the ground experiences we've had during the divestment campaign at Cornell University, and I'm going to briefly run over what made us choose Cornell as a target, because it may seem, we are students at Cornell, so that made it easier for us to organize there for reasons that Geronimo explored. But we were also thinking a lot along the lines that Jack kind of outlined in his talk, and we sought to kind of survey the space we were in and focus our efforts on the institution most complicit in the ongoing genocide, and that happened to be Cornell University. And so I'll just explain briefly why we believe that's the case. Cornell is complicit in the genocide along 5 main axes. First of all, our university has a $10 billion endowment, one of the largest in the country, and has several hundred millions of dollars invested in war profiteers, including many of the companies that we've been talking about throughout the duration of this panel. The second axis is through corporate partnerships that Cornell University maintains with BAE, Boeing, Elbit. No, excuse me, that's incorrect. It's BAE, Boeing, and Lockheed Martin, as well as Raytheon. And through these corporate partnerships, Cornell offers special deals to the engineers working at these companies, where they get reduced tuition if they temporarily pause their employment to come and get their master's degree. So Cornell is involved in upskilling these weapons designers at a nice fancy discount. In addition to that, Cornell's constantly working with these companies to host special dinners, recruiting events, trying to suck up the most vulnerable members of Cornell's community into the military-industrial complex. The third way in which Cornell is imbricated with the ongoing genocide is through this, I would say, is the most damning one, is it's in partnership with Technion. Cornell runs a joint campus with Technion, the Israeli technology university, on Roosevelt Island in New York City. They pooled their money together and have an entire campus. And principally, the programs on Roosevelt Island focus on things like AI. They have a robotics lab, very like surveillance technologies, things like this. Fourth, Cornell offers to its endowed employees, it offers a retirement plan through which its employees can make investments either through TIAA or Fidelity Investments, which offer investment bundles that include a lot of the companies complicit in genocide. You take, for example, Boeing or Caterpillar. And fifth and finally, Cornell receives, we've discovered through audits, receives hundreds and thousands of dollars in federal research funding that gets funneled through Raytheon. So Raytheon gets the money and then decides what kind of research projects it's spent on within Cornell University. So those are the 5 things that tie our institution to the genocide. And so I'll wrap up really quickly here with 2 last things. First, there's a really strong institutional factor on our side in the fight for divestment, and then a pretty humongous one on the other side, pressing down on our fight to win divestment. And so I'll talk about each and ask for help with the second one. The first one is that in 2016, after about a decade of pressure from environmental activists on Cornell's campus pushing for divestment from oil companies, like Chevron in particular, Cornell broke down, and the Board of Trustees instituted in 2016 a policy about divestment. It's one of the only ones like it in the country. It's the 2016 Standard to Guide Divestment Consideration, and it holds that the Board of Trustees must consider divestment from companies and those and institutions whose actions constitute genocide, apartheid, or systemic cruelty towards children. So what I'd like to emphasize here is that Cornell's own rules, which they put on themselves, require them to, at the very least, consider divestment from companies like Bay, Lockheed, Elbit Systems, all of these companies that they're not only invested in, but partnering with to train their employees. So these are their own rules. And despite this is a rule they've been consistently ignoring. They refuse to answer questions about it or acknowledge its existence. When some Board of Trustees members were confronted by it, they claimed to have never seen it before and told us they would look into it before, never reaching out to us again. And so the last thing I'd like to touch on is an interesting counterweight to that institutional bonus on our side. This comes in the form of Executive Order 157. I wonder if many of you who happen to be based in New York State are familiar with this. This executive order, which was signed in a couple years ago. Sorry about that. I wish I had pulled that up earlier. But essentially what it holds is that if any institution or a company divests from or tries to sanction the state of Israel or companies or institutions doing business with Israel, then that institution will lose all state funding. So if Cornell University were to divest or otherwise break partnerships with weapons companies that are doing business with Israel, Cornell would lose all its millions in research grants, in state aid for its students. So, like a quarter of the campus is composed of buildings owned by the state of New York. So essentially it would dissolve the university, which I don't know, wouldn't be a bad thing, but that's the counterweight against our argument for divestment. So sorry if I took too long. I'm just going to end with one ask. If you guys can support us by providing somebody, possibly a lawyer, to help us to gain a better understanding of Executive Order 157. We're not entirely sure how much of a real threat it would be. We don't know how to gauge whether or not New York State would actually be willing to shut down Cornell University if it were to break these rules. And furthermore, if anybody has advice on how to effectively campaign against Executive Order 157 and push back against it, that would be tremendously helpful. So sorry I think I took a little too much time, but I really appreciate all of you guys listening. And this is such a tremendous talk. So thanks for everybody's time.
Thank you very much, Malcolm. I think that the specifics that you outline are a big help to people across the country who want to investigate the connections that you spoke about, these 5 different areas. Very important. And I think that we will be able to get you some help about the executive order. I see Marjorie Cohn has weighed in on that already. Marjorie is a very noted human rights lawyer who has helped us with the Merchants of Death Tribunal as well. I also want to note in looking at the chat that War Industry Resistance Network is a place of great resources about these corporations, and there are many webcasts that they have done. Ken Jones has done a remarkable job of leadership with War Industry Research Network. I like to call it WIRN because I think of it as a radio station that makes it easier for me. But anyway, I want to just say that our final presenter, Ava Harrington, goes to UMass Amherst, and I live very close to UMass Amherst and have connections with other people there. There have been a lot of courageous people at UMass Amherst, including professors. There have been people from the community who have gotten arrested there. And I think Ava will tell us more about that. I am very grateful for her to take the time to be here and to put a really personal, caring face on what has happened at UMass Amherst and the courage of students there. So thank you very much, Ava, and please carry forward.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to speak. Thank you to everyone who spoke before me. Yeah, so my name is Ava Harrington. I am a junior at UMass Amherst. And I kind of wanted to speak a little bit more about the social and communal side of divestment. So as it was kind of previously brought up, actually UMass was a site of one of the largest arrests out of the encampments nationally. We had 133 people arrested. I think 80 of those people were UMass students. The rest were community members or college students from other colleges in the area. So I think there's like a lot of interesting things to talk about with like that financial side of divestment, but kind of what the arrest said, more social side of things and trying to frame things, thinking of disruption or of trying to change the status quo. There are no rights that are won purely through their virtue. You are not awarded civil rights, you are not awarded the ability to speak freely or to speak against war profiteering. So that can be the university administrators, that can be politicians, that can be, your local district attorney. The way that these rights are won is through mass organizing. So when we're thinking about divestment, it's important to frame, I think, thinking a lot about strike. So where we tend to see the most change in the status quo is when there is a disruption of the economic flow. So when, like going back to Vietnam, we saw there being a partial immobilization of one of the largest militaries in the world through, I think it was Westmoreland's request for military troops being downsized and partially approved because of the general student strike and the general strike that happened in 1969 and then in 1970. When looking at divestment with apartheid South Africa, a lot of that came, like the initial proposals for divestment, while the United States tried to maintain economic ties with South Africa, there were these social movements for divestment put forward because of the pressure that was put on from the civil rights movement. So what I think is important to think about is to frame the university as a business and as part of these larger institutions, because that is how they effectively function. So at least at UMass Amherst, we do not have open disclosure of our financial state. We don't know where our tuition money goes to. For the past 6 years, there have been consistent tuition increases. There is a severe lack of housing. And this kind of all comes together to this point of community and the social side of divestment, in that while we are advocating for the Palestinian people, this is a site of many, many issues. This is about environmental issues, about indigenous rights, about free speech. And this is like an area where this coalesces. So thinking about the university as an institution, as a place that is trying to funnel you into the war machine, it's also important to think about the other side of funneling into the war machine, where the people who generally are joining on an infantry level or joining the US military are often people from working class backgrounds. The states with the highest number of enlistment per like capita relative to population are often the least educated states, in the areas where people have the least access to higher education. So states like Florida, Texas, West Virginia, these are all states where you see like the highest number of like enlistment. And like that's why it is important to break out of these boundaries of simply thinking about this is the university and we're organizing as college students, you know, like in virtue of like standing up for what's right. We need to think about how do we use the privilege that we have to have space and time for educating and for organizing to bring that into the wider community. Because while this is about the liberation and the self-determination of the Palestinian people, it also is a coalition of the military-industrial complex, of environmental issues, of all of these things that is worth fighting for. And I think it's really important to frame that when, especially we're seeing such severe backlash against Palestinian activism. Many people think of this as, why should I put my future, why should I put something at stake for a conflict that is happening thousands of miles away? Like, why is this directly relevant to me? And it's because every time you go to work, every time your tuition increases, there's a certain percentage of that money that is directly going to the manufacturing of weapons that is killing civilians. And for some people, that's not enough. But looking at the way that the university functions as a business, that our own government functions as a business, where corporations are afforded more rights, where, you know, lobbying and essentially like legal forms of corruption run rampant and are basically the backbone of our economic and like political functionings. That is all important to keep in mind, and that is the importance of finding like community and in doing this communal organizing. And I think it's really interesting to reflect back to past student movements and to look at how we can learn from certain historical trends, because this fight is not a new fight. This is a continuation of many left-wing fights that we've seen before that have ended up reaching roadblocks, you know, so we're talking Occupy Wall Street, we're talking environmental movements, all of these Black Lives Matter movement, all of these movements that touch on the issues with imperialism and colonialism and capitalism and how that impacts our day-to-day lives that have reached roadblocks. And we need to learn how to gather all of these together and to kind of coalesce to show that while this is about the self-determination of the Palestinian, directly impacts every individual, every American, and that it is our moral imperative to stand against that. And the way that that comes about is through mass organizing. Simply having college students, you know, protesting and getting arrested, there's obviously much benefits that. I participated in that, but it's also important to keep in mind that it's a member of a certain privileged class that can come across as saying things like, in virtue of my sacrifice, we're asking for this response. And that's still, in a way, petitioning the ruling class and asking them to listen to you. But that's not going to happen. What we need to do is mass organization. So where you actually see change, where you see disruption at an institutional level is when you have people going on strike, when you have people that are saying, I'm willing to risk, you know, union sanctions or fines or the potential loss of my job to do this. And that comes through mass organizing, and that comes through community. So I think there's a lot that can be found through looking back at past movements and thinking about how do we break organizing outside of just the box of like within this university. Because realistically, one university divesting doesn't change the fact that the United States is still sending billions and billions of dollars to Israel in aid. But a university divesting and it becoming a social imperative to stand against money and resources going to fund a genocide, for people to disrupt business as usual, to be willing to put a certain amount on the line to disrupt those economic processes, that is where you see things change. And that is where you see a cessation to finances and energy going towards these causes. So I think I've gone a little bit over my time, but just to sum up, I think it's important to think about, yes, the university level, but also to frame things as the institution and to look at the general like economic and political power structures and to try to break outside of that and to make sure that we are doing things as a community, as a collective, that we are focusing on mass organizing rather than trying to do this continual petitioning of the ruling class, because that is not where you find success. You find success through community and through mass action.
Thank you very much, Ava. I think that your, I guess, point about petitioning people in power is extremely important to think about because in one sense, when you're talking about mass organizing, you're talking about a restructuring of the power structure rather than acknowledging that the power structure should and continue as such with the same priorities and imperatives and violent base behavior. So thank you very much for bringing that up. At this point, we can go over our time. We can go for another 10 minutes basically for people to ask questions. And we did run over time with various presentations, but I felt that was very important so people could, fully complete their thoughts. But if people do have questions, please put them forward, and Kathy will keep track of that, and we'll carry forward.
You also have a couple of hands. And Terry, could you start your video so I can put you up here with the rest of your panel?
Okay, would the people who have their hands raised just put their question in the chat if possible, because I want to leave the maximum amount of time for people to ask questions. Georgia, we have a request to see Christian's map.
We don't just all have questions, though.
Well, perhaps, Nick, going back to an earlier part of the presentations, while Christian was presenting, someone had pointed out that while it's certainly true that in the United States, the corporations have tremendous control over the government. This questioner said, well, in China, the government has control over the corporations, and then the corporations have control over the people. Christian, do you have any thoughts about comparison between the system here as an autocratic, oligarchic system and what might be happening in China today? Does that ever come across your mind when you're doing your research?
Sure, but I'd like, my wheelhouse is not analysis of Beijing or the Chinese government. So I'd like to stick with what I know for a fact right now. And I find it very, not very difficult, but pretty difficult to find reliable sources of information in US and even independent US media regarding the nature of the official enemies of the US ruling class: China, Venezuela, Cuba, etc., North Korea, whatever. So I'm going to steer away from that one right now and stick to US war machine, if that's okay.
All right, thank you, Christian. Just didn't want to overlook that question. There were some questions about the aims of September 1st to 7th. And I know that Mike's got his hand up, and I should imagine he might have a comment as well as a question. But Mike, would you want to take that matter of the aims of September 1st to 7th briefly?
Thank you, Kathy. Yeah, and wonderful job, really. This is one of the best presentations I've ever seen come out of VFP convention. Thank you all very much. A lot of good stuff here. The September 1st to the 7th actions in solidarity with the people of Palestine is an opportunity for us to, and through various chapters and active members around the country, get out to war manufacturers, congressional offices, any appropriate place like that, and serve the letter that, this is a little different than the letter that Terry was describing, because that is got to have some research put into it and have some specifics about the particular weapons plan. But this is an opportunity to get out and take the letter Terry previously wrote that outlines all the ways the laws are being violated when doing weapons shipments to Israel, and have that letter and say, you're breaking the law, here's the chapter and verse of how you're breaking it, and we are here to non-violently enforce the law by sitting down in your driveway. And however you want to work that out. And we're trying to get as many people and places that we're active in around the country. We've got about a dozen right now that are doing this sometime between the 1st and 7th of September. And there's a wonderful opportunity. And I just want to throw in, I will personally get out to as many student picket lines as humanly possible. So please let us know where and when those are. And some of our VFP members will get out, and we will get a hold of our union friends, some of whom are now retired and can get off their butts and join us. Thank you.
And to Ava and Geronimo and Malcolm, several people over the course of this discussion have mentioned linkage with other movements, such as the environmental movement. And each of you at some point mentioned in the history of your own universities or the wider struggles, that sense of linkage, specifically with regard to the environmental movement and climate catastrophe that, the three of you face in your own futures in, enormous ways. Is there any comment that one of you would want to make with regard to linkage with the environmental movement activists on your campuses or in the wider picture?
I could speak to that very briefly. I think that that's actually been like an important site of struggle for us at UMass, is trying to form coalitions and build ties. It also, the movement for divestment from fossil fuels also happened, I think, at 2016 at UMass, and that's kind of set a certain precedent for how we're going about divestment here. Just in terms of like linkage, I mean, war is bad for the environment. Every time that a bomb is dropped, every time that white phosphorus is used, that's something that does countless environmental degradation. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but that is a platform in which we are trying to form coalitions to reframe Palestine from being like a geopolitical issue and turning it into an issue of life.
Thank you. And while you were speaking, Eva McGregor-Eddy put in the chat that Israel possesses thermonuclear weapons and has said that they want to use them potentially against Iran. So we should keep that in mind as well. There was also in the chat a request that Terry elaborate on his comment that when war is the enemy, when war is your business, peace is your enemy. I'm sorry, Christian. Christian, can you amplify on that quote? When war is your business, peace is your enemy. What does that idea of peace being your enemy mean?
I would just say that, war is your business. You can come up with a variety of pretexts to keep that going. These war corporations, we have to look at them as the ruling class on top, and then the workers within the corporation themselves. And the workers are not the bad guys. The workers are not the bad people. They're the ones who are trying to just, in a horrific, horrible U.S. economy, just trying to make ends meet, and sometimes they take a job, for better or worse, at a corporation that does really bad stuff with the goods and services that they make. And so the bad guys are at the top. It's the top corporate executives, the board of directors, and of course the top generals in the Pentagon, and the bureaucrats that run the quote unquote national security state, the permanent warfare state, at National Security Council, CIA, etc. So those are the real bad guys. So we need to make sure that we understand that these are top-down organizations, and where the bad guys are located within the organization. And that's not to excuse the fact that the workers at many of these corporations create very harmful products, but we must keep in mind sort of the way the system works and where the real true authority lies within these corporations. So yeah, war is your business, peace is your enemy. And through lobbying, through campaign finance, through trade groups, 501c registered nonprofits that operate in DC, through think tanks that generate the narratives that sustain permanent warfare. These are all the ways that a corporation can influence U.S. government policy and, in fact, capture it. So that's the essence of the game.
Thank you, Christian. John Ivins has a question that I think perhaps somebody with a legislative or legal background could help us with, and that is for organizers who are threatened by administrative spokespersons who tell them you will never get a security clearance that you'll need if you ever want to work for a large corporation. Is there some way that people can reduce that threat by saying, well, that's not legal? I wonder if anyone on this call can speak to that. Maybe Terry, in your experience as a...
Well, could I just say, Kathy, that we're really running close to our time limit. And so if there is a response from Terry or anyone else, please be very brief. There are questions for people who had their hands up, and I'm sorry we can't get to them because we have to honor our technical people here who have to prepare for the next panel. But I'm sounding like Amy Goodman at the end of one of her shows. But anyway, Terry, did you have any answer to that question?
I have a very quick answer. I don't know. It's a tough question, and people, it may be something that you can use the online services that erase parts of your online presence. But that's a real tough question. Security and screening out people who might be threats is, of course, that's the currency of the age.
Yep.
It's a very tough question.
Thank you. I want to just say I really do appreciate everyone who has been on this panel.
Nick, the
Yes.
next workshop leader is in this workshop, and he has graciously given you another 5 minutes.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I think I see Ken Durst has had his hand up. I've asked people to put their questions in the text or in the chat, but if these questions can be very short, I mean like seconds, that would be great. And Ken, and the other people, would you want to go forward, Ken? Okay.
Yeah, Ken, our Ken.
Okay. Well, is there anyone else who has a question that they would like to put forward right now?
Leave the door open, let's lock the front door.
Okay.
Nick, I put my own email in the chat. I did save the chat. There's all kinds of information that's been entered into the chat. Thank you to everyone who has done that. And if any of you aren't able to save the chat on your computer, feel free to write to me and I'll send you the information that's been saved.
Well, I just, in conclusion, I really want to say that this has been a very inspiring time. I feel that we all have made very important connections that we will continue to develop and work on. And we have a lot of people who have been watching this, up to 110 people. And I would say to them that each one of us is our own inspiration. Everybody should find out what ideas come to them. What do we do next? We're kind of in a street fight here, so whatever you can throw at it, we'll throw at it and see what works. This is an experiment on how to non-violently resist the situation we find ourselves in and to carry forward into a positive plan of action, not just stopping the mess that we have on our hands, but we have to stop the slaughter and build life on top of what comes out of it. Thank you, guys.
Christian's map, there's a link in the chat, so I'm gonna give people a couple of seconds to find that, copy it.
Thank you, Ellen. That was a point I was going to just bring up, that probably not enough time to look over the map seriously. So getting the link to the map will be very helpful.
All right, it's already up a ways because people are putting a lot in, but give people a second to grab it, and then I'm afraid we got to go to the next workshop. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Ellen.
Ellen.